we're talking about pride and LGBTQI plus representation in media and entertainment, in gaming. Why is it important, you might ask? Because many of the queer folks, when they come out, it's really important for them to see examples of other folks out there. Quite often we turn to books, we turn to media, we turn to entertainment. When we think of gaming, 2.4 billion people around the world play games today. That's why it's really important for us to have authentic, honest, truthful, representative stories in those games. Because if these are the experiences that folks turn to, and then they see just cartoonish and typical representation of folks, they won't really see themselves in there. So this is what we're talking today on this panel. We'll be unpacking what does the LGBTQI plus representation in gaming looks like? What are the best practices? And we'll talk with the creators of one of your most favorite games and see how they're bringing that representation to life. So today I'm joined by a few panelists, and let me introduce them. We'll start with Lisette Titri Montgomery. Lisette is an art director at Double Fine with 20 years of industry experience and 13 ship titles. She has led art studios large and small and contributed to some of the industry's highest profile games, including Tiger Woods Golf, The Simpsons, I love The Simpsons, Dante's Inferno, Dance Central 3, Sims 4, fun story, this is where I was exploring my sexuality in Sims 4, South Park, and Transformers Age of Extinction for Android and iOS. Her most recent project is Psychonauts 2 with Double Fine Productions. Welcome, Lisette. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm very happy to be here.
And we are very happy to have you here. Well, next up is Kate Dollarhide. Kate Dollarhide is a Nebula Award-winning game designer and writer of speculative fiction. She was formerly the editor-in-chief of the short fiction magazine Strange Horizons. Today, she's an area designer at Obsidian Entertainment, where she worked on the Outer Worlds and the Pillars of Eternity series. We'll talk Outer Worlds quite shortly, and this game has one of my most favorite characters in all of the games I've ever played. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Cool. Next up is Elise Baldwin. You've just heard about Elise from Living in August. Elise is an audio director at Xbox Publishing with a passion at crafting and delivering exceptional audio experiences for playable media, with particular emphasis on sound effects, recording and design, music direction, voice direction, and pipeline toolset development. She created audio for award-winning franchises on a wide variety of platforms and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Game Audio Network Guild in 2019. Welcome, Elise. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so pleased to be here with you.
And last but not the least is Christina McGrath. Christina is the head of community at Rare and is a highly accomplished and award-winning communications professional with particular expertise in social media strategy and community engagement. She has worked on 18 titles in the community management space, but today she works at Rare, growing and engaging communities for Sea of Thieves, Battletoads, and Arrow Wild. Welcome, Christina. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Alexei. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for dedicating a part of your Saturday to talk about this important topic. I want to kick it off with asking you, why did you decide to spend this day talking about LGBTQI plus representation, and why is it important for you? Why don't we start with you, Lisette?
Sure, I think representation of all kinds is extremely important, but I think when people are extremely marginalized, representation is extremely important for those communities. This is not unusual for me to spend a Saturday. I'm usually here or on site at Gameheads, where I'm working with youth from Oakland, trying to get them to make their own games. And a lot of our students are LGBTQ, and they use their games and what they create to process what's happening to them as they're becoming and coming out and becoming who they are as people. So that's really important to me. So that's why I'm here today. It is really all about everyone having a voice and feeling included and seeing themselves expressed in the medium like games.
Thank you, Lisette. Kate, now we're going to you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like growing up, there was a lot of representation I can find for myself in books and even sometimes in TV and really movies, you know, especially as a white woman, but like as an ace woman or a bi woman or a woman who's both, that representation was really thin on the ground, and especially in games. So for me, it's just really important to let players find themselves in these worlds and be able to have positive, meaningful interactions, let them maybe model difficult conversations that they could have with their loved ones. So and that's the kind of stuff I'm really excited to bring to gaming at Obsidian.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Kate. I can resonate. I think for me, as I was growing up in Russia, I didn't see much LGBTQI plus representation anywhere. And only after I moved in here in the US 5 years ago, I was like, oh my goodness, it's actually, there are movies, there are TV shows. I had to make an effort to find them. That was quite phenomenal. Like, oh wow, there is a whole world out there. Elise, now going to you.
So it's such a great question. I mean, definitely in my career as an audio director, I've had lots of opportunities to contribute my discipline expertise to the projects that I'm working on, but I've never before, tell me why, felt like I had the opportunity to bring my 20 plus lived years of experience as a queer woman and an advocate for the LGBTQ plus community to a product that I was actually working on. And so for me, Tell Me Why was a really pivotal experience in that regard. It was very powerful to bring more facets of myself to my team, to be able to share more about my experience, including the understanding that I have of queer and trans communities from being in community for so long. And then also to have really measurable impact on like our inclusive production practices and how we decided to make this game.
Thank you, Elise. We'll unpack more of it. I can't wait to hear. I think we don't really have a good history of trans representation in media in general. Just
Yes.
Recently, Laverne Cox released this beautiful documentary that speaks to 100 years of trans representation in the movies. And you kind of see all of this stereotypes and cliches that community experiences on the TV. And if this is what we see all the time, that's what we start being programmed to think that people experience. That's why we're talking today about different ways to approach it and actually make representation better and more truthful. Christina, now to you. Why are you here with us today?
Sure. Well, the panel's of really kind of personal importance to me as a queer woman. I'm really passionate about LGBTQ plus representation because, fundamentally, visibility and interactive kind of entertainment experiences are incredibly important to, people in learning and discovering who they are. Particularly from the kind of community perspective, I'm really here to talk about how we want to make sure that if we're kind of having products and games that have kind of inclusive characters, thematic kind of discussions, etc. Just making sure that when you're talking about that, you're taking that through to the community spaces and making sure that your players and your community are able to have those kind of open discursive experiences without fear of being kind of persecuted. And again, just speaking to some of the other bits that the other wonderful panelists have touched on, gaming experiences fundamentally, at least for me, are more meaningful and authentic when they've been worked on by people who've had a lived experience of what's on screen. So here to kind of talk about diversifying the workforce behind games, not just in them.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Christina. I think that's a really important topic that we'll hit on today is how we can be truthful without actually hiring the people who are from the community and what's the best ways to do it. I wanted to start by asking you if you could share a little bit of a personal story. What is the first experience in the game where you felt sin in one way or another, and what is like for you? Why don't we start with you, Kate?
Sure. I was really sort of shocked and delighted the first time I played Dragon Age Origins. I mean, I love RPGs. I've always loved RPGs. That's why I work at an RPG studio. And the world of Dragon Age is very inspiring and cool and weird, and it's a classic fantasy adventure. And then to meet a character like Leliana, who is this very fierce woman of faith, who has moments of crisis and who also loves women, that was like incredibly shocking and empowering for me to experience as a young queer woman who was not totally sure of my identity and how I wanted to talk about it with my family, and just being able to like express affection and love for someone who I cared about, even if it was a digital person, helped me start to have those conversations with other people in my life.
Thank you, Kate. That's really powerful. Lisette, what about you?
I think representation came in various forms for me because I think it's taken time for full Black queer representation to actually happen in games. But I mean, even something as simple as seeing lipstick on Miss Pac-Man mattered to me. When I was small enough, I remember gravitating to that machine. It gets that basic, right? Like you see yourself at that young of an age and you want to gravitate to understand what's happening to that character. So for me, it's taken time. I think started with Miss Pac-Man, and I think it was a while before I felt like I saw myself in anything. Um, and then it really wasn't until I started working that I realized that that was very much true, because I was working on game teams creating character parts for Tiger Woods, for example, and I couldn't make myself. And that's kind of was the moment where I realized why I was doing what I was doing, other than the fact that I was passionate about it. It was that there was nobody else here to say that you're not representing me. So I kind of took the reins and made sure that that happened. And I think that's why it's so important to have people who are present and in the office to point those things out and say, hey, what about everyone else?
Thank you, Lizette. Thank you. Elise, what about you?
To be honest, I don't remember a particular, like a specific aha moment. I think I relate a lot to what Lizette just said about like kind of it being more of an evolution over time and over exposure to different products. I do remember the first time that I ever played The Sims in the early 2000s, being very excited that I could woo another female character and actually build both a relationship and a household, or I'm sorry, a household and a family around that relationship. I remember being really excited by that. But I don't think I have an aha anecdote in quite the same way that many of my friends and colleagues do.
I think it's still fantastic. It comes in different ways for every single person, and you're on your own journey and you see your own signs. I was just reflecting today as we were starting this panel. I was like, what is actually the first game I saw a queer character? And I think it was Sims for me. It's maybe even before Sims 4, but I acutely remember myself seeing two same gender, same sex characters in the room, and it was resonating with me internally. And I was like, what is going on? I think it took me years later to realize what was going on, but it was still there. This is the power of games. Christina, what about you? What was the first time you felt seen in the game?
Sure, and just like how Lisette and Elise have said, like it's kind of been an evolution, but for me, like the crystallization of that moment was really in 2015 with Life is Strange, as recent as that. When I played that game for the first time, I saw myself in it and my past relationships of my youth. And it captured amazingly like the questions you have, the feelings you have, you know, the emotions you have. And it really kind of encapsulated and crystallized such a formative experience for me that it felt incredibly affirming to have my life played out like that. And, you know, that's not just been for me, but that game has such a massive following, especially with kind of a younger queer community and the fandom that it so clearly resonated with as well. So if I had to kind of pick a moment where I was like, wow, this is me on screen, it would be going back to 2015.
I think it doesn't matter when it happened. Like just when it happens, it's such a moment when everything changes. And one of the reasons we have all of you today is you just not following that passion. You're not just advocating for more representation, you're actually doing it in the games you work on and in your day-to-day. And I think that is fascinating, and I hope that is very fulfilling for you. And I wanted to ask you a few more questions. How does it feel like working on these titles, and what you face as you do it? Elisa, let's start with you. And the question I have for you is, what do you hope players take away from Tyler's character? We just heard from Livy and August the experiences they had working on the game, and I want you can unpack it.
Sure. I mean, I think for me personally, like, I really wanted players to experience the depth and well-roundedness of the character of Tyler. Tyler is a very fully conceived character. I also initially early on in the project, I was a little concerned that like players would actually feel that Tyler's transness was the core of the game, which it is not. It's a really critical component of the Tell Me Why story. And definitely something that I'm super passionate about, but the story is actually not about Tyler being trans. So that's something that I thought about a lot, that balance of getting the representation right, but then also like the story not intrinsically, the heart of the story intrinsically not being necessarily about Tyler being trans.
It's basically
yeah.
exactly like I remember it.
How do you strike that balance, Elise, centering on the character as a person rather than gender identity or sexual orientation? What were the discussions like as the team was thinking through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, like the narrative team, both at Don't Nod and at Microsoft, struck an incredible balance in terms of reaching that perfect sweet spot, and also obviously August's portrayal and Adept. It just like the incredible depth of his acting was also a huge contribution. We did this thing, we're very, very collaborative throughout the entire narrative and recording process, but definitely August had lots and lots of key input for us that was like super critical to bringing that character of Tyler to life and really making that character read authentically. And so he would, he had basically like veto power in the booth to say like, I wouldn't say it that way, I would say it this way. I don't think that is like the way this would be expressed. And that was a really key component, I think, to the development of that character.
Thank you, Liz. I think there is this a very common practice in many corporations and brands that are saying, hey, we'll bring people to the table. Oh, and it's funny, I think there is an airplane flying over my house. Apologies. That's the beauty of the live feed. So there is this saying that like, hey, let's bring all of those amazing folks to the table, but then those folks are not listened to and their opinion is not really counted. And I feel the magic of what you're describing is that we not only just invited those folks, we not only gave them the place at the table, we created a table with them and they had the say and they decided where we're going with the narrative. And I want to go next, Kate, to you, because I think that is a very similar, like a very strong character we've seen in the outer world as Parvati. And I'm curious, what are some of the fan reactions you've heard about her? And if you can unpack a little bit what came together to create a character so impactful.
Sure. So I'll start with what sort of came together to create Parvati. Parvati was originally concepted and rough drafted by Chris Latois. He had to leave the project unexpectedly, so I took over Parvati, and it was sort of an incredible stroke of luck, really, that this character, this young woman, and I had so much in common. I'm tremendously lucky to work at a team that is full of amazing queer people, so that when I have questions or if I want a second opinion, I can turn to somebody else with similar experience to me and say, hey, how would this read to you? Do you think there's like a better way we can do this or portray this? I worked really closely with a particular QA designer named Ariana, who gave me a lot of great input on like a maybe generational level. She's a little younger than me. So to make Parvati more relatable to a wider swath of queer women. So that was really incredibly lucky on my part, and I feel very privileged to do that. And then fan reaction, it's almost too overwhelming to talk about sometimes because I got fan mail, whether it's personal email, physical letters, tons of people in my Twitter mentions talking to me about the reactions, seeing these conversations that Parvati has with the player at the bar in particular, and being able to model a conversation about like how to talk about being ace and being in a relationship. They were able to interact with this conversation and then take that conversation into their lives. So to have those conversations with their families and use it as a jumping off point for their partners or their parents or their friends. So people would then come back to me and say, like, I got to have this incredible experience with my parent who never really understood what it meant to be ace and all the thoughts and challenges I have with that. And then I could show them the scene and they would say like, oh, it's like this for you. I think I understand now. And then they get to start on this road to a more honest relationship.
That is so beautiful. I feel there is this saying that games create empathy at scale. And I feel this is what you're talking to, is that Parvati unpacked for so many people the ACE experience, especially for folks who might not be aware that there are ACE people in their lives and they haven't had that conversations with them. Thank you for bringing that representation. Lisette, I want to go next to you, and I'm wondering if you can unpack some of the more challenging aspects of featuring more diversity and truthful representation in your games and how you are approaching it.
Yeah, I think that's always been a challenge on several of the games that I've worked on, because the team makeup did not reflect some of the characters they were trying to create. And of course, there's like a challenge with creating authenticity when there isn't representation. So for example, I talked about the example of Tiger Woods before, but there have been several instances. Thankfully, working on a property like Sims, there's kind of a baked-in inclusion into the culture of the teams. But even then, you sometimes find some gaps in what is necessary for representation. So you always try to find ways, especially when you're expressing a character, to make sure that you're doing with it authenticity, that it feels real to the players, and that somebody's going to connect with it. So making sure that you're not overly gendering your characters is extremely important. Having very black and white views of what is male and female is not necessarily good either. So when you're developing a character, you're having these conversations with your team, and who are they and what are they doing? And you really do need to be a part of that process before the art comes out the other side. It really can't be layered on like icing after the fact. So it really needs to be ingrained even in the development of the character and the visual development of the character along the way. And every time I found games that got in trouble for that, it was because there was that lack of ingrained authenticity.
That is fantastic. Huge snaps for your t-shirt, by the way. I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more. Sometimes when we have these conversations inside the team, for many folks, it feels that representation is like a button, right? You press it, like you do 1, 2, 3, and it's done. But I feel what you are saying, it's not really a lens we put at the end of the process. It starts from the very beginning. Can you outline that process a little bit? How does it look like?
Sure. I mean, the character development process goes beyond like, what is the gender, race, and ethnic origin of this character. That's the easy part. The hard part is where this person grew up. Did they have a mother? Did they have a mother and father? How did that affect them? And then you start answering different questions about this character as you're starting to tell the story of who this person is. And if you are not part of those discussions on what is their background, then you get very often very stereotypical answers. One of the games that I always have trouble with, or like Grand Theft Auto or some of these games that are extremely urban, is they just don't represent the people that I know who are people of color, because once again, we're not part of that story. So it goes down to, who is this person in the backstory, and does this feel like a believable human being that I would know on the street, rather than someone I think is a stereotypical character that I would see on TV. And so I think that's the challenge of representation. When you don't have that swath of representation in games, people kind of go to the default stereotypes. And that's what shows up in the art.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful to see that process. For me, as a consumer of the games, I've never created a single character, never created a line of code. When I see them, I feel like they look beautiful, but that's the end of it for me. I'm really in awe of the depth of thinking that goes behind some of those characters. It takes weeks, it takes months, it takes years, and just huge kudos for all of you for doing it. I want to go to you, Christina, because I think something we touched on with Lisette is really dear to what you folks did with the Sea of Thieves, and that's the pirates creator, and how you approach creating a character within the game. It's one of the first experiences you're exposed to as you begin the game, and essentially it sends a message like, hey, this is what we are all about. Can you unpack a little bit how fans can see aspects of themselves in the pirates creator?
Yeah, of course. So Sea of Thieves is ultimately a shared world sandbox where you go to live the pirate life you want to live. And our ethos throughout all kind of design production is that freedom feels good. When you're a pirate, you do anything you want because you're a pirate. So really, we wanted that philosophy to filter right down into how players present and represent themselves. in a way that felt kind of organic to the game, but still was obviously incredibly inclusive. I can see you've got the kind of initial screen there. Just to run it through for people who don't know what it is, essentially, when you start the game or you take the pirate appearance potion to change your pirate, you are served essentially with 8 completely randomized bespoke pirates. And these pirates have different body types, body shapes, face shapes, ages, skin tones. So the real beauty in this is that you can kind of pick someone who looks like you, or you can pick someone who looks completely unlike you. But at that point, you're presented with what we would consider like 8 completely individual and charming different characters. That opens up an option. It's like, okay, do I want that version of my pirate, or do I want this version? So it's been really interesting to watch people select a pirate that is absolutely nothing like them in real life. That is something that we have seen. We have taken the learn that if the option is there, people will kind of diversify. And then going on from the character creator, obviously, once you've got your base pirate, you then have all the cosmetics. And our approach to cosmetics is that any customization options can be applied to any body type, whether that's masculine or feminine. So, for example, if you're a young white male pirate, you can equip makeup and a dress. It is entirely your prerogative to do so. We're not going to stop you. And conversely, if you are an elderly black woman, or a pirate with a feminine body, I should say, you could equip trousers. And if you wanted to, you can equip a pink and purple ombre mustache if you want. And then every single option is available for every single body type, etc. And then going up further on that, if you want to then go into the game and for your ship equip the rainbow flag, you're able to do so. So we try to give players within our sandbox as many tools and as many ways of expressing themselves and presenting themselves the way they want to.
That is fantastic to hear. I'm one of the avid character creators. Every time I'm playing an RPG or a game with a huge variety of choices, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm going to spend the first 2 hours just building my character, and a really huge appreciation for you folks putting hearts and minds into it. I'm wondering, at the time when you think about this character creator and you are outlining all of those options, if there are conversations like, oh my goodness, that's too complex and the cost of it is astronomical, or something like that, because I feel like that's some of the common concerns when we hear from folks like, hey, let's be more inclusive. They're like, oh, it's like we have timelines, we have costs, like there are all of these implications. And to touch on that, I actually want to go to Elise, because I think you've had an interesting experience creating Tell Me Why, and you have quite an insight what it takes to build games like this.
Yeah, I mean, I do think for every game it is a little bit different, but I absolutely like what Lizette said about like, you got to start early, you got to do it right from the beginning, and you have to be prepared to iterate and to like really, maybe have a lot more critical conversations and even difficult conversations, nuanced conversations about your portrayals. One thing that we did recently on the Tell Me Why team is just, I kept having this idea rattling around in the back of my head, like, how much did all the inclusive production efforts that we put into the game, how much did that actually cost? So I'm talking about things like strategic partnerships with GLAAD and Hoonah Heritage Foundation, which is the Tlingit advocacy organization that we partnered with on our portrayals of the Indigenous characters in our game. So I'm talking about strategic partnerships. I'm talking about inclusive casting, meaning that ideally every actor who played a part had lived experience that correlated to the role that they were playing. Things like we took a massive research trip to southeastern Alaska where the project is set. It was like one of the very first things we did. And it was both Don't Nod and the Xbox publishing team. We went there for 10 days. We sat in a little village of 800 people on the coast of Southeast Alaska and just talked to locals and took photos and did interviews and really tried to understand this community and also like what being LGBTQ inside of this community would feel like. And obviously there was a huge component of cultural education around Indigenous populations and communities that was a part of that. So anyway, this is very long-winded, but to say that I sat down with my producer and we basically tried to quantify like what percentage of the actual project budget did all of those combined efforts cost. And it came out to less than 2% in terms of hard costs, which blew my mind. I thought it would be much higher. And it for me really convinced me that this idea of inclusive production practices and embodying them throughout the entire life cycle of a product is scalable and can be applied to any product, from an independent product all the way through AAA.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. Elise, I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about that trip. And I'm curious if you remember, as you went into the trip, if you had certain conceptions about what you will experience and what kind of stories you'll see there, and how they changed as you actually interacted with the environment, with the folks, learned their stories, and saw what it is like for them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think thankfully I didn't have too many preconceptions going into it, because I'm sure they would have all been totally blown away. The trip, the trip was so amazing. I think I mentioned that we partnered with Hoona Heritage Foundation, which is a Tlingit cultural advocacy group in Hoona, run by an incredible woman named Amelia Wilson. And she organized so many interviews with community members, tribal elders, I mean, people that whose like job functions correlated to our characters' job functions. She also organized like an incredible roster of Tlingit cultural activities for us to take part in and to kind of soak up. And it absolutely blew me away. But I think that definitely the one-on-one conversations were the most powerful thing. I will say that I mean, I feel emotional even talking about it, but we met a lot of community members. It's a very small town. A lot of people knew we were there. I mean, it's like 10 Microsoft employees and Don't Nod team members walking around in this tiny little town. Like, we were not subtle. And people were curious and like wanted to know what we were doing. And the community reception and reflection from people around having their community and the Tlingit culture represented in a large-scale studio production just really touched my heart. I was so bowled over by how genuinely excited and open-hearted people were.
Thank you. That's fantastic to hear. I think it really touches on what Lisette, you said a few moments ago, is that it really starts at the very beginning, and it starts also with hiring. And I'm curious if you can share a little bit, like what goes in the concept art process, and how you decide on the visuals you bring to life, and how these stages are critical for the success and the representation of the title.
Yeah, I think everyone is sort of having the same thread here, where it's weaved through, right, from beginning to end. So for the concept art process, once you're done with start getting the backstory and getting enough visual detail that you can start fleshing out the character, then it really starts to become important when you start hitting the writing. So the writing for us at Double Fine, of course, comes from Tim, and we sit down and we review the writing together, and we kind of discuss what we like about the character, what we like about the writing, what works, what doesn't, if something is problematic. So even as things are being written, we're reviewing it and making sure that we are catching things, and that everyone is sort of part of that process. And then once things are written, we kind of know this, where the scene is taking place, where the characters need to be going, and we need to visualize what that world looks like. And so me and my artists, I have a very talented team of artists, Emily Johnstone, Levi, and Gigi, and Bakel. They're all really talented artists. So we'll sit down and we'll say, okay, where is this place? So what does it look like? And we start together gathering images. And the images, like a mood board, starts to tell the story of what we're going to make. And even the images you collect are going to influence the final design. So when you sit down with an inclusive team, they're going to find different resources to pull to you. They're not going to look in the same places, especially if you're working on something that's very stylized. You really need strong concept and you need strong cultural relevance. So once you're done with all of the visual reference and collecting, and you have your writing and you have this world to build, then it gets down to the drawing, and then you just start iterating with thumbnails and sketches and start developing this world and these characters. And as you're going through that process, you're also once again looking, is that shape, if I'm making an Asian character, is that the proper clothing? Do they have to wear, traditional clothing? Does it even make sense? Why are we doing this, right? So you're just constantly questioning as you're going, until you find and the team and the leadership settles on a design where we think it represents that character. So it really is just threaded through the entire process. It can't be just an icing you slap on top. The players feel that they understand that when it happens. And they also understand the opposite when they really connect with the character, because you spent that time and you built those layers, and they believe who they are, and they see themselves in that character as well.
That is amazing. I'm wondering if you mentioned an example of a dress for an Asian character. I'm curious, how does the team find the expertise to have answers to such questions?
But fortunately, at Double Fine, we have a very diverse team, and we're very fortunate. We have a very open and honest communication style at Double Fine. If people feel like something is problematic, they feel they have the opportunity to say something, and they won't be just dismissed for it. And so for us, you can hire consultants if you don't have it, but it's best to hire it and hire the talent and hire talent that's diverse, because that's where you need to catch it. You need to catch it in the day-to-day.
Thank you. And I see everybody's nodding and in violent agreement. I'm curious, I want to go, Kate, to you. I think you mentioned, and Lizette touched on it, as the writing is a huge part of making the character come to life. And you earlier said that you inherited a big piece of Parvati, and I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more how that process looked like for you. What were the changes you were bringing to the table, and how that all transpired?
Yeah, absolutely. So I inherited Parvati from her original writer, Chris Latois. She came to me as a very fully realized character from Chris. She was ace from the beginning. She loved women from the beginning. So I was very lucky in that regard to inherit this character that was very easy for me to work with. But I inherited her rather late in the development process, and all developers know, like as you get toward the end of the process, you have more content than you can reasonably finish. So you have to start making cuts, and some of the cuts are painful. Parvati's quest, for example, was quite long. It seems very long in its current iteration. It was much longer before. And so part of the challenge for me was looking at this very large quest and saying, what is the essence here? What is the point of this? What do we need to get across? And what is the best experience for the player? And then cutting down parts of the quest, branches of it, steps of it, or whatever, to really get to the heart of that matter. And I felt like the quest really has two hearts, but the first one to me is that conversation in the bar where she shares her fears with the player about whether Junlei will really understand or accept her as an ace woman. And that was always present in the quest, but it was touched on rather lightly. And I was like, you know what, here's a really good opportunity to really dig into what it feels like to potentially be rejected or thought of as unlovable by someone you care for very deeply, someone whose affection you want, or in the future, someone who might decide that, you know what, this thing they thought they were okay with, maybe they're not so okay with it anymore, and to really address and acknowledge that fear. So, you know, I was incredibly lucky. I was able to dig into this quest and say, like, I want to talk about this one particular thing for an extended period of time. And my fellows on the development team were very supportive of that. And I think it shows in the final conversation in that it is fairly engaging and rather more dramatic than a lot of our character conversations, and very personal. So, you know, I was tremendously lucky in that regard. And yeah.
No, that is.
I don't even know how to end that. It was just like it just worked out.
No, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. Christina, and can you tell a little bit more as players create the characters? I think we're discussing, hey, in certain games there is already a character and they have a story, and it's really important for us to be very intentional in the background in approaching every single piece of that process with the lens of representation and being authentic and being truthful to what we are saying. And then there are games when you create a character, right? When you can choose whoever you want to play. And I'm curious, what are the key takeaways you want to have players from the characters that might not look like them, or the characters that might not be necessarily representative of who they are? How do these discussions take place, and what are the key takeaways you have in that process?
Sure. Well, the key ethos, again, going back to Sea of Thieves, is that freedom feels good, and it is about providing as many tools in that sandbox as possible. Fundamentally, when we design the game, our player cosmetics were always designed to tell a story about that particular pirate's personality and experiences. And in that respect, the character is the host for the player's personal lore, which I think is a really lovely way of looking at it. So, of course, sexuality and gender is completely a part of that. And again, the real driver was to make sure that if someone wanted to represent themselves a certain way or present themselves a certain way, they were able to. So I think first and foremost, it's giving those players choice. And also on the flip side, it is wanting to make sure, like, to some extent, queerness is normalized, as well as those non-conventional gender identities and expressions. And as we've spoken about previously, visibility is so important, and being able to kind of authentically express yourself is important. So this is kind of where we came from this. In terms of kind of, the cisgendered heteronormative players, for want of a better phrase, like having those kind of different pirates served to them actually we'd hope help them break free of those rigid expectations of traditional expressions of, masculinity and femininity. I guess for us, the end game would be for those players to be like, okay, cool, that's a cool dress, I'm just going to equip it, regardless of what kind of pirate body shape that they had. And then for them to go on and understand that presenting a certain way is not a threat or an affront to their identity. You would really hope that you'd see that kind of understanding translate through to real life. We have over 10 million players in Sea of Thieves, as we announced earlier this year. So even if a tiny percentage of those players, have an attitude shift of that kind, what that translates to in real terms is potentially less instances of harassment of queer or trans people on the street. And kind of going back to this, I actually spoke to our wonderful player insights team ahead of this, just to see what our numbers were and how pirates were choosing to kind of present. So if you excuse me, I'm going to read this because I don't want to get this wrong. In terms of gender split, although we don't actually hold the data on our players' gender anymore, we are able to estimate. So we actually estimate using certain sets of data that we have at least 10% more feminine bodied pirates than we do female identifying players. So that's like, in one version of an event, that's a lot of men choosing to then go and play as women. And then going to representation across race, over the half of the players that have created a pirate over the last 28 days are playing as non-white pirates, and over half of that same cohort of people are either playing as middle-aged or elderly pirates. Our pirates kind of are incredibly diverse, and we see this from the character selector through to the hair, the makeup, equip. So really, like, it's amazing to have those numbers, and no two pirates for us really look the same. But just then to touch on something that both Elise and Lisette discussed, we are absolutely prepared to continue iterating. We don't look at those stats and think job done. Particularly with the kind of resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, we've had a lot more feedback come in from our community about how we can make things more inclusive and better. And really, for me as head of community and for my team, it's really important to have the community voice represented in those conversations where we are discussing iterating, and making sure that when we're iterating, we're doing it in the right way, with the right approach, with the right goal in mind. So yeah, it's really been an enlightening process, and we try and give players as many tools as possible, but we are still preparing to equip players with even more ways to express themselves.
Thank you, Christina. I think intersectionality is such an important piece, and I love that you're hitting on it. And I really loved your point about switching from, and I think you even said it as you were talking about it, from male and female bodies to more masculine and feminine, and how it opens up gender expression and gender presentation to more folks out there. One of the key things I'm taking away from today is we are streaming this for 24 hours. And one of the early conversations talked about how it's usually white, cis, gay men who are driving lots of LGBTQI agenda. And I'm questioning my gender, but I'm still presenting as cis, and I'm white, and I'm gay. And I feel like key question we are always discussing in the community is how to lift up more voices, how to share these intersections of race and gender, how to share different ethnical backgrounds. And I'm curious, what are some of the learnings that you folks had and as you were designing your games, and how you're approaching this? Community is not a monolith. It's very easy to center just on one group. How you're ensuring that we're thinking in a more holistic and a more embracing manner? It's a very loaded question. I'm wondering if we can start with you, Elise, and if you can unpack a little bit how you think about it.
Wow, it is a really big question. I'm like very nervous just thinking about how to articulate my feelings on this matter. I mean, I will say that one thing I think that we've done continuously throughout the production of Tell Me Why, and especially as the narrative was being written, was to really look at our narrative and to look at our kind of like the cast makeup, the character makeup of the project, and to look and identify places to inject more diversity if possible, and obviously for what made sense for the setting and time frame of that game. I mean, yeah, I think that was something that we did early on, that we kind of had this continual conversations around that. There's definitely some intersectionality in the title in terms of like the character set. I don't know if anyone caught this, but I'll just give a little shout out. We did announce yesterday, we revealed a second LGBTQ plus character who is also Indigenous. We did a reveal around that yesterday for the game. His name is Michael Abila, and he is a young queer Tlingit character. He's Allison, the female twin's best friend. So it's definitely something we thought about a lot in the course of making Tell Me Why, and that really has permeated the entire production cycle.
That is amazing to hear. Who wants to take this next and also answer this question? I see Kate. So, you wanna? Oh, sorry, Christina, go ahead.
That's okay. I'll come at it from a community perspective. As Lisette has talked about, it's very important to have people hired in the studio in those roles to be in the conversations from day one. But in terms of how you take on board community feedback, it's something that's really, really important to us, and something that my team facilitate. And I think we have a responsibility, if we're allowing people to represent the way they want to in game. We have a responsibility for them to be able to do that in our discursive spaces, places like our social channels, on forums, or our Discord servers, or Reddit, to make sure that they can have a safe experience doing so. So we have a community code of conduct. The first rule is everyone is welcome on the Sea of Thieves, and we have a zero tolerance policy against hate, and that's something that we hold on every single channel we have. And it's not something that's just extrinsic as well. We take that to the game. If we understand that a player is being harassed in game because of a difference, or if they're marginalized and they're essentially being persecuted for that, we are very forthcoming with the banhammer, for want of a different phrase. So for us, it's really about, if we're presenting those values in game, we're living them on all of our channels extrinsically. And when we kind of review our community moderation and community conduct guides. So for us, it's really about having the infrastructure to be able to do that. Something I actually wanted to call out, it's not Sea of Thieves related, but we did discuss this, and Livy, who was doing the interview previously, has done a wonderful thing with the Discord for server for Tell Me Why, whereby essentially you can emoji vote to assign yourself pronouns, which are then converted to roles in the Discord server. And I saw some new pride flags in there too, and that's really, really awesome. It's those kind of seemingly small adjustments and additions that make queer identity so easily expressible and welcomed in a way that doesn't like sensationalize or anything, but it's so organically interwoven into the infrastructure of the server, and it normalizes both pronoun sharing while still being optional for those who don't potentially wish to disclose. And it's that kind of considerate, and it can be additive, it doesn't have to be groundbreaking, but making sure that you have that infrastructure in place for everyone to be able to express themselves, that leads to being able to kind of take on board better feedback. You don't have a certain cohort of people in your community who are telling you one particular thing, you have all sorts of voices, and that's where how you get kind of a more inclusive, more well-rounded kind of feedback loop with your players.
I really love your point about small things. If they're built into the system, they're normalized and they become the quality bar of the experience that's expected. And I feel that's really powerful. Kate, I think you wanted to jump on this question as well.
Yeah, I want to address it specifically as a writer. Just going back to something that Lizette said earlier about how questions of representation, doing right by our characters, starts at the beginning with the writing. There's an obvious divergence between me and Parvati. We might both be into women, we might both be ace, but she is Indian, she's South Asian, and I'm not, I'm white. I was very lucky that we had a team member who named Nitai Padar that I could go and talk to and say, hey, Nitai, is this an accurate representation of her culture, or does this name work? Things like that. To do right by these characters, we have to be able to ask people or have them be worked on by people who are like them. I like to believe as a writer that I could write anybody with any kind of research, with a lot of research, I could write anybody. But I don't think that's necessarily true, and I don't think that's necessarily right. I will never be able to represent the internal life, the history of a character of color, because it's not my experience. And while I have a wild imagination and a great deal of empathy, it's just not the same. So really going back to something that we have sort of addressed throughout this whole conversation is that it doesn't actually start with the writing, it starts with the hiring. We need to have diverse teams to represent reality in a way that is true and honest. So I'm lucky to work with a lot of queer developers, and that's really cool, but my studio is overwhelmingly white. So if we want to represent more people of color in our games accurately and with honesty and care, then we need to diversify the studio too.
I'm absolutely with you, and I think that's a really strong point. And Lisette, I know you run a nonprofit that looks into bringing folks of color and queer folks into gaming. I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit more about it.
Oh, yes, I love talking about Gameheads. For the last 5 years, I've been on the board and volunteering at a local program called GameheadsOakland.org. And with Gameheads, we focus on marginalized youth in Oakland from ages 14 to around 24, 25 when they get out of college. And we're essentially a free game development accelerator. So we take students who've never made a game before, and we train them up through design thinking theory, design skills, art skills, pretty much anything they need to know to make their first game. And they do that from the winter months to the spring. And then in the summer, it's their job to break off into teams while they're off school, and they make their first game. And they do that with the help of industry mentors. One of the superpowers of our program is that we get industry mentors from around the world. For example, Tim Schafer is a mentor. Several people in our studio are mentors. We have mentors from EA, Ubisoft, and all of the major companies, big and small, who literally sit down with brand new students of color and give them advice week over week on how to develop their first demo. And the program has been extremely successful. It's been developing around 5 years. So now we're getting to the point where in the last few years, our students are getting into the top game schools in the country. We have students at USC, NYU, UC Santa Cruz, and they're also now our first wave of graduates are starting to come onto the marketplace. So for the last 5 years, some of these kids have been developing games for 5 years before they even had their first job. So, the argument that there isn't enough talent or there isn't enough skill, it absolutely is not true. There just isn't the correct infrastructure in place to develop this talent. And thankfully, Games Heads is one of those organizations. And now that we are in a pandemic, we've kind of shifted to being an online program. So now we're now nationwide. We have students all across the world, and they're all learning how to do co-development, like we are all learning how to do co-development at home. So it's going to be a very interesting summer. But I'm very excited, especially this year, with some of the topics that the students are working on and developing for their first pitches. And so much of it is centered around what's happening right now with the Black Lives Matter movement. Many of our students are queer and transgender, and several transgender students, and there's so much of themselves coming out and through in these just little demos. And so for me, that's the future of gaming. It's not the established IPs. It's not the people who are running the big companies. It's these kids. I mean, they're the ones who are going to be the next wave of games, especially as we become more international when we hit 5G and the market space is going to expand once again. We're going to get 1.8 billion new players, I think was the last stat, over the next few years. And most of them are going to be coming from LATAM countries, Africa, India. And once again, this problem is going to expand. How do we relate to 1.8 billion new players in completely different cultures than ours? And the only way to do that is to find the talent and develop it.
I love that. I think there is a line in your story is that it's our responsibility to actually go out and find that talent and nurture that talent and help bring it to the industry. It's not sitting and waiting like, hey, our team needs to be more diverse and giving that feedback to our HR and our partners, but actually doing the job. And I love that you're proactively helping kids and getting them into gaming. I think that's fantastic. Elise, I wanted to talk and touch a little. We have 5 minutes, but I think it's also really important because as we are talking about representation, I think you earlier shared there was one of the challenges how you folks found August Black and what was the process like, and how the tools that you were using in that process were not necessarily helping you find the right artists. I'm curious if you can unpack a little bit more.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I will say actually that it was not just for August that we encountered systemic limitations in our talent pipeline, but actually for our BIPOC characters as well. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I was very dedicated to this idea of doing inclusive casting. We found, I'll talk about it with regard to Tyler's character because I think it's the most pronounced there, but I think you can see that the same systemic problems might manifest in different ways for other characters. But so, for example, most of the casting databases have a binary gender designation of male or female. Many trans and non-binary actors do not have agent representation. So going direct to agent or doing kind of a agency casting call is not necessarily going to be a super productive way to go about it. We also found that in spite of the fact that we explicitly asked cisgendered actors to not apply or audition for these roles, that indeed they did. And that was complicated because you can't legally ask someone what their gender identification is when you're auditioning them. And so it required a lot of really diligent work on the part of our casting director, Julia Bianco Scheffling, to basically use unconventional methods to find talent to audition, particularly for the role of Tyler. She did a ton of Instagram diving. She did a lot of YouTube watching. She really went down some very deep internet rabbit holes in an attempt to basically deepen our pool of talent that we might audition for this role. I'm really proud of the fact that obviously finding August for the role was such an incredible just stroke of luck for us, and such a deeply fruitful collaboration. We had this idea that we would try to also cast trans actors for Tyler in all of our localized languages. And I'm really happy to say that through the diligence of our localization team, we were able to do that. And I had never heard of any production being able to do that in the past. So it was very exciting for us.
Huge snaps for that. Thank you so much. I think I will start wrapping it off. I want to thank you, Lizette. I want to thank you, Kate, Liz, Christina, for being with us today. Thank you for not just advocating for more representation, but actually bringing it to your daily jobs and creating those characters, creating these experiences that make people feel seen and help us around the world to actually realize that this more equitable and more open world is possible. As we all mentioned, when studios, large and small, interact and when they create those characters, it actually doesn't require rocket science. If it's integrated into the process, if it's a fabric of your daily life, these stories, they come to life naturally and organically. It is amazing to have diverse talent pool. It's amazing to have diverse teams and consult those who are the experts and know how to reach to them and what are advices they can bring to you. As you're going through this, you might experience systemic issues like what Elise just shared about, but don't be discouraged. There are ways to go about it, and there are ways to still create those characters and be true to your stories, as well as I feel Lisette encourages all of us to then go out and find this new talent and bring it to the industry. Regardless if you're a small studio, if you're a large studio, it's all possible. And by bringing those stories to life, you're changing lives for folks around the world. If it can be a character creator, or it can be a pride flag inside the game, or it can be a pronoun. It can be a small thing or a large thing, but it makes a difference in people's lives.